Good evening to each one of you all. It's so nice to see each one of you all. At least if you all can initiate your video, at least I'll be able to see each one of you all, and then I suppose you all can switch it off. Hello Mansi. Hello Yashoda. Pranjal, Laveen, Chaitra, Aishwarya, Kanchan. Hello Aishwarya. Hello Chaitra. Hello Kanchan.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening to each one of you all. Good evening. There's two more who's yet to. Okay, nice to see you all. Now I suppose you all can, your videos can be off to suit your convenience, however you all feel. It's nice to once again come back to the lectures on CPC. Earlier, before the lockdown, I was in your Malleshwaram branch for a while, but then owing to the lockdown, we were not able to continue with the said lectures. So today I would like to start off with a basic introduction to CPC, and with that I will start topic wise, and at the end of each session, maybe 15 minutes, I will give you all for question answer, a session where we could have a question answer session. You all could ask me questions. Either I will start off with answering your questions, or we'll keep it for the next class where I'll start off with answering your questions. Coming to the Code of Civil Procedure, the Act of 1908. As you all know, this Act was enacted in the 53rd year of the Republic of India. We see that there was an amendment in 2002, which presently we are all following. But the Code of Civil Procedure, as we see, was enacted relating to certain procedural aspects when courts deal with issues pertaining to any matters which are civil in nature. Basically, where our cases are concerned, there are only two major classifications. One is civil and the other is criminal. Criminal, it is just a very small purview which would only cover maybe our penal laws, IPC, the Evidence Act, and the procedural aspect of how criminal procedure should take place. Okay, what are the procedural aspects when you have to deal with any matter which is criminal in nature or which attracts a penal provision? All the remaining acts, either state, central, or whatever acts, all these acts, the remaining acts are covered by CPC. So we see that the laws relating to the procedure in suits and civil proceedings are governed by criminal procedure. This starts off basically with the very fact of how procedurally you go about it, of drafting, then how you file it, the procedural aspect, and also our pleading and how ultimately we conveyance it, and how courts deal with their various aspects of pronouncing judgment, and ultimately how to execute the judgment. So we have judgment as a chapter. We have the procedural aspects of how summons should be sent, the procedural aspect of how drafting should be done, what are the contents of your pleadings, which is in order 6. Then you have order 7, when you go to court, how do you set out your plaint? Okay. Then you have various aspects of how a defendant comes to court and he files in his written statement. Then thereafter, it takes you to how exactly you file a case. Judgment is given, various types of judgments, Indian judgments, you have foreign judgments, whether they are binding on us or no, foreign judgments. Then you also have the decretal part. Okay, once a decree is given, what is the way a decree should be executed? Okay, as you all know, it's not like a criminal case where you have a final order, then that person is either set off, acquitted, or whether he has to undergo a punishment. But whereas in a civil law, you have various recourses to law. It could be either a compensation to be paid, it could be damages to be paid, it could be handing over possession of certain things, it could be a direction that you have to hand over something, register something in favor of somebody, or it could be maybe even you have to get something from somebody. So how do you get it? Just because by virtue of you having an order in your favor doesn't mean that you are going to have everything in your favor. Next is the procedure of filing an execution petition. So once execution is done, what are the various procedures? Okay, that various procedures that you come across in execution, you have that as a subject. Okay, that execution, how should it be carried out? If you have to make payments, if it is payments into court, or is it directly an attachment before the judgment of certain properties when you know that the person may abscond or try to deprive you of maybe trying to get this type of a decree in his favor, whatever. So we see that there are various ways in which you can deal with criminal civil procedure and criminal procedure in different means and ways. So basically criminal procedure deals with matters concerning penal provisions of how they have to be kept in various places. It could be jail, whatever. But when it comes to civil procedure, we have how things, it even deals with death, marriage, insolvency of parties. Then we see it could be something dealing with immobile properties, money suits. Okay, so civil procedure, as you all know, covers a very, very vast subject. Under civil procedure, you may be wondering what are all the various acts. Okay, apart from the regular acts that you have. Now, suppose you have a family court issue. Your filing of applications under, if it's a divorce matter, it's under the regular divorce act of whichever personal laws of that person. For example, now you have maybe if you are in maybe a family court situation, if it is your divorce proceedings that you have, apart from whichever laws you are under, if you are a Hindu, your divorce is under the Hindu Marriage Act, read with section 151 of CPC. 151 is an inherent provision of CPC, civil procedure. The same way in which you have 482, which is an inherent power in under criminal procedure, 482 section. The same way you have it under 151 CPC. Now, suppose you file for GNWC, Guardianship and Wards Act. There also any provisions you have, you put a civil procedure. Suppose you have execution matters. It is read with whichever suitable provision or the relevant provisions of CPC. Now, suppose you have your company laws. You deal with company laws, read with CPC. Then you have various central acts, right from your Motor Vehicles Act. Then you have your Income Tax Act. You have your contracts. So you see that there are innumerable hundreds of civil procedural code acts which govern each of the respective acts that we come across in our day-to-day activities. Okay, for example, right from birth and death registration, you have your every walks of life, educational department, you have an educational act. When you are under a company law, you have your company law or you have your labor laws. Then if it is something pertaining to maybe your various aspects of life, we see that everything is governed by various acts. Okay, it could be circulation of money, chit fund act, okay, where money laundering is concerned. So the acts are innumerable. But now for students, I don't think we have to go into the in-depth. It was just me trying to tell you all how procedural civil code and procedure is important for every aspect of our day-to-day activities. Now coming to civil procedure code, this code as we see of 1908 was basically enacted so that we would have fixed or a set of principles to govern whatever activities we conduct in a court of law. This Act of 1908 was enacted so that it would come into force on the first day of January 1909. Basically, this extended to the whole of India except the states of Jammu Kashmir and the states of Nagaland and the tribal areas. But thereafter, now since even Jammu Kashmir comes under the purview of our Indian jurisdiction, now it extends even to the states of Jammu and Kashmir. So tribal areas means the territories which were immediately before January 1972, which were included as tribal areas. It could be of Assam or maybe the states of Nagaland and the other northeastern parts of India. The very second section of CPC has various definitions that we come across. It starts off with what is the definition of code. When we refer to code, it means a set of rules, regulations or principles that have been laid down for us to follow or for us to adhere to. Decree, when we refer to decree where civil court or civil rules of practice is concerned, a decree refers to any type of a formal expression of any type of a case or adjudication which has been passed with regard to any final judgment, or it could be the determination of any type of a question of law which is finally interpreted. For example, you may have a judgment running into maybe 30 pages, 60 pages or maybe 100 pages. Judgments will have various aspects of the case. It will start off with the cause title. It will start off with what are the basic facts of the case, when were these cases or when was it filed, when was the evidence recorded, what was the evidence and cross-examination conducted, then what was the issues involved in the case. Then each of the issues are answered either in the negative or in the affirmative. And thereafter, the judge will have his reasons for having passed the final order. So we see that this final order, which is usually called the operative portion of this judgment, would hardly be a paragraph. It will mention that therefore the defendant is directed to do so and so. It could be maybe listing maybe 1 to 10 various things that the defendant is directed to do. In the case of a recovery suit is where you file for recovery of money. Okay, it's a money suit basically. So in a money suit, for example, it would say the defendant is directed to pay the plaintiff a sum of rupees 2 lakhs along with interest from the date of filing of the suit or maybe from the date of this order until final recovery of the said amount with interest. or if it is maybe an injunction suit, okay, an order restraining you from doing something, it would say that the defendant is restrained from doing such and such an activity. So that will be the operative portion. So when you come to the judgment part, what will happen is the judgment will basically just mention what is the operative part in a line. Okay, now whatever is the maybe whatever is in the operative part of your order, this decree will mention that the defendant is, now let's go back to the same recovery suit. The defendant is asked to pay a sum of rupees so and so with interest at the rate of so and so. The court will calculate the amount and you will have the facts, figures there which the defendant is liable to pay as on the date of passing the decree. So decree usually will have its cause title, the name of the court. It will have the case number, the names of the parties, and it will also have the names of the parties, and it will have the entire operative portion or a direction which is finally there in the order sheet or in the operative portion of the order. So we see decree is very important. In a case, just the judgment alone will not suffice, but you need a decree to accompany the judgment. Sometimes a judgment may have a certain procedure only till a certain date, and thereafter you see that still it continues because maybe the defendant has not adhered to the final judgment, or it is a continuing process maybe where he has to every month pay a certain sum of money. So the decree will tell you how much exactly has to be paid, and if this decree is not adhered to, then the next procedure is for you to file an execution case trying to execute the judgment and decree so that you get an order in your favor. So that is what decree means. Then under decree, we see that decree can also have an order of dismissal of a case. This dismissal could be either because of default or because of non-prosecution. A dismissal for default will be when the plaintiff has been careless in not pursuing his matter, not taking process. Process is when you have to take process to make sure or to ensure that the defendant appears before court. Now, the various means of sending out process would be to send out summons, to put out a paper publication, or to see that a substitute service of summons is done, like pasting of summonses on a particular wall of a building or a door, or maybe in some conspicuous place so that summons can be seen. So we notice that, yes, somebody has raised their hand. Is there some problem? You can unmute your hand. Yes. Would you like to say something?
Hello.
Hello, yes.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Tell me.
Ma'am, I have one small problem, ma'am.
What happened? Tell me.
Ma'am, as I am third year law student, CPC is not in my subject, so I am not able to understand that much. So, can I leave class?
Yes, please. You can leave. You're in third year. What are your subjects in third year?
Ma'am, CRPC and labor law and ma'am, labor CRPC labor law and ma'am evidence.
Okay, okay. When do you have CPC? Is CPC a part of your fourth year syllabus?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Fourth year. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Fine. Okay. So
Ma'am,
what's
do
your name?
do you, ma'am, Mayank Mishra, ma'am.
Mishra. Okay. Mishra, if this is not in your syllabus, then you need not waste your time here. You can
Ma'am,
leave.
but I want to prepare from third year only, ma'am.
Then no problem. You can stay on. No problem. Continue.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. So I was telling you that a dismissal for default and dismissal for non-prosecution. Non-prosecution, as the name itself suggests, it is when you do not prosecute your case for whatever reason. It could be maybe your client has not turned up, due to which you have not been presenting yourself personally, nor presenting your client before a court. Maybe it is set forth for judgment, or it's set forth for maybe before judgment, it is posted for either evidence or your arguments. When a case is posted for evidence, once, twice, maybe maximum thrice, an opportunity will be given for you to take an adjournment. But when you constantly keep taking an adjournment on one pretext or the other just to postpone the case, or maybe just to harass the opposite party or to prolong or to protract the proceedings, then even the court realizes there may be some reason. Your reasons could be even maybe your client is not available. For whatever reason, he is unable to come to you. It could be as basic as non-payment of fees to an advocate, he doesn't turn up. Or maybe he is gone on a job or opportunity or for some other reason out of the country, out of the nation, somewhere. So he has not turned up, because of which even you are in a helpless position. You just keep dragging on the case as much as possible. Ultimately, it comes to a stage where the case cannot go, a last chance is given, or finally is given. Ultimately, the judge will tell you, see, next time if you don't keep your client present, I'm going to dismiss it. Either your evidence is not done, or maybe you don't address your arguments. Or maybe your client has been asked to come physically for his appearance before court and you don't, he doesn't turn up. So under these circumstances, the case is dismissed for non-prosecution. Dismiss for default, as I mentioned, is when you do not take action to issue process to the other person, okay? Issuing process is where you issue process or you make a payment in court so that summons reaches the opposite party. So when you, because you do not have due diligence or you have been irresponsible, maybe owing to your work pressure or maybe it slipped your mind, you do not take process on to subsequent hearings. Okay, it's just a matter where you go, you pay 8 rupees, which is the basic minimum for process. Or if it is to send a registered post acknowledgement due to send summons through registered post, what you do is you send a registered mail, so you have to furnish an envelope with postal stamps. So when you don't do this promptly, maybe you could go, or if you're a senior advocate or you have a team of advocates, you can say that we pray for time, because you need postal stamps, you need an envelope, you need an acknowledgement from the post office. So you have to go well prepared, so you plead for time. Again, on the second date, when a date is given, again you plead for time. And when the third opportunity is given, if you still do not make use of this opportunity given to you, then what happens is the court will dismiss your case for default, that is for non-taking of summons or process. But once your case is dismissed, it is not a be-all, end-all for an advocate. There are still provisions under which you can restore a case. Okay, you can put up a case which is dismissed for default or dismissed for non-prosecution. Suppose you don't get summons at all, and after maybe a year or so you realize that okay, there was a case against your client which summons was not issued for whatever reason. It could be that the wrong address was mentioned because of which summons did not reach him. Or maybe he knew about it, but yet he pleaded ignorance and he just thought nothing will happen. But then ultimately the judgment is against him. So what do you do under these circumstances? You don't just sit back and take what comes. You file a case for setting aside this judgment and decree that has been passed against you. Okay. So with time, I will come to each one of these provisions. Today in one class, I will be scanning through right from the first section of CPC right to the last provision. Okay, so that in one class you get a full gist of what is going to be the topics we are going to study henceforth. And with that, our next class, I will start topic wise. Each day I will complete 2 topics. You'll have any questions, I will be giving you all even a lot of decided cases, some illustrations, some of my own experiences as an advocate, so that you will understand certain situations and you will come to a better understanding. Now, coming to the next, as I told you, when there is a decree, it is a final interpretation of what entirely the judgment comprises of. Then when you try to execute this decree, okay, what does execution mean? Where you try to enforce the judgment that is in your favor. As I mentioned, if it's a money suit, you try to enforce recovery of your principal along with its interest. If it is an injunction suit or if it's for the demolition, okay, a mandatory injunction is where you ask for demolition of a certain property. So you just cannot think, oh, I have an order in my favor to demolish that building. Okay, maybe your neighbor has encroached into your property, so it has to be demolished. It doesn't vanish overnight, does it? Unless you take stringent action as per law. What is the action? You file an execution case. You get the court officials to come with court permission. If you anticipate that there could be problems, you will ask for police protection. You will ask the court to allow you to employ the assistance of maybe civil workers. It could be a mason, it could be a JCB, it could be civil engineers. Okay, so all these people will come to the spot and with their help you demolish the building. So that is called execution of whatever judgment you have. So when you file an execution case, you have 2 parties to the case. The person who files the case, okay, in an execution petition, he is the decree holder because he has a decree in his favor. The opposite party, he is called the judgment debtor. So decree holder means any person in whose favor a decree has been passed or an order capable of execution has been made. How in a civil case you have a plaintiff and a defendant. In maybe a case where you have a family issue, you have a petitioner and a respondent. In the same way, when you file an execution case, you have a decree holder and a judgment debtor. The next topic is district. Okay. Section 3 is decree holder in CPC. Section 4, yes.
Ma'am, the starting first topic is decree, right? Then you are telling the next topic, right?
No, this I am going section wise as per definitions. The first definition was code. Code refers to rules, regulations and principles I told you in CPC. Okay. The second definition was decree. The third definition I told you was decree holder. Fourth, district. District means the local limits of the jurisdiction of a principal, city civil court or whatever. For us, jurisdiction would be Bangalore. Are you all taking down points?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, your voice is muted, I think. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So, when you refer to a district, it means as per whichever state concerned. Okay, now we are in Karnataka. Karnataka has so many number of districts. So district means the local limits of the jurisdiction of whichever principal civil court they have. Okay, that is now in Bangalore district, we have our principal court, which is the city civil and the sessions court. So each district have their own courts, they have their own district level, have their own civil judges or district judges, as they are called, DJs, okay, district judges. In rural areas, okay, in rural areas, you have case courts which are called senior division and junior division. Okay, they are civil judges and they are of the cadre of munsifs. Okay, the lowest cadre of judges are called munsifs. After a munsif puts a number of years service, okay, I think usually it's around 12 to 13 years of service. Then with promotion, they become district judges. So when you do a civil judge or a munsif exam, you are in a cadre. If it's a civil court, you call them as first they are junior division, okay, civil judges. Then they become senior division civil judges. Then with promotion, they become district judges. And the same thing on a criminal case, in a criminal court, where they deal with cases pertaining to criminal matters, they are called JMFCs and JSFCs, junior magistrates, judicial magistrates of the first class, judicial magistrates of the second class, and you also have your various executive magistrates and district magistrates. Okay, you must have learnt it in the hierarchy of courts, which starts off at section 12 of CRPC. So there you have learnt of hierarchy of courts and how these various magistrates are. So magistrates are the lowest cadre of judges. Okay, magistrates and civil judges. Okay, then comes the district judges. He is called a DJ. Okay, many of you all are aspiring to become district judges. You all are going to attempt the district judge exam. Okay, so you will directly become a DJ, okay, district judge and a sessions court judge. Okay, the next cadre after magistrate is sessions. In a civil, it is civil judge, junior division, senior division, and then you get a promotion to DJ. So when you talk of a district court, now in Bangalore being a district headquarters, we have district courts because Bangalore is a metropolitan city. It's a district. Now suppose you go to a rural area where munsif courts are. Now you go to maybe Anekal, you go to maybe Nelamangala, you go to Chikbalapur, Dodbalapur, okay, to any of these, Malur, okay, you go to Hoskote. There are various courts in and around Bangalore which come under Bangalore district. So when they come under Bangalore district, it refers to the rural areas. It is not Bangalore city, but district refers to the jurisdiction of the local limits of whichever principal civil court or whatever. So they all come under the purview of Bangalore city civil courts, if you're talking about Bangalore for now. So these civil courts, they start off with their lower cadre of civil judges, junior division, senior division, and you have their district judges. The next section 5, we talk about foreign courts, and 6 is foreign judgments. As the name itself suggests, foreign courts and foreign judgments refer to any court which is situated outside India and which is not established or constituted by our Indian central authority or by our government. Okay, so any court which is established outside our authority of the central government or outside India constitutes a foreign court. And next is foreign judgments. Any court, order or judgment passed by a court which is situated outside India is considered a foreign judgment. Section 5, foreign court could be any court situated outside India. Okay. As of now, we have our neighboring countries. You have China, you have Pakistan. Okay, you have various countries in and around India. Any order passed by any of these courts constitute a foreign judgment. Now the question is whether these judgments are binding on us. For example, one of you all do something wrong in one of these countries and you escape and come to India. What will happen? Does the court in India have a right to try you, or does that court where the cause of action arose have a right to try you? The cause of action would be where you have committed the offense or where the cause of action commenced. There the wheels of law start to spin or run. So if you have committed a mistake, maybe in Pakistan, you have to go back wherever you are and be tried as per their law. Now, for example, we have a very famous thing or a case pertaining to Vijay Mallya. Now, his cases are all triable only in India. So what do? They have to extradite him from there, and then he has to be brought down to India, and then he has to be tried. For what mistakes and wrongs you have done here, he cannot be tried there. It is but common sense, isn't it? So the same way, suppose any foreigner comes and commits a crime in India. What do? Now I want you all to answer. Unmute yourselves and answer. A foreigner, he is maybe from Japan or maybe from China. He comes to Bangalore and he commits a theft or a robbery. What do? And he escapes back to his country, China. So does he get tried there being a citizen there? Or do we punish him here in Bangalore as per our laws? Yes.
I think
Or can he be tried in both places?
I think he will be tried where he committed the crime.
Okay. Where the crime was committed, he has to be tried. Okay. That committing of crime or whatever happens in a civil case also is always called as cause of action. Remember certain terms which I use. Okay, these are all legal terms which you will be hearing me time and again mentioning it. When you become an advocate and you start drafting your own petitions and your lawsuits or maybe notices, these are regular words which have to come up. So cause of action happened in Bangalore. Irrespective, now we have a lot of maybe northeastern people who were jobless. They were committing a lot of thefts. Okay, they were mugging people. We have a lot of people who were from Africa who are into drug peddling and so many other such activities. Okay, they are all penalized or they are all charged under NDPS. NDPS is narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances, NDPS. So irrespective of whichever nationality you are or you belong to, wherever you have committed any civil wrong or a criminal action has been caused wherein somebody else has been grieved by what you have done, it constitutes a wrong, civil or criminal. So cause of action starts there. Same thing applies to each one of you all, maybe for your future or maybe in job opportunities, further studies, you go to a different country, you commit a crime there. They have every right to penalize and to see that you are behind bars as per their laws for what you have done. In some places, countries, maybe the laws are so lenient or a little different, due to which that offense is not punishable in their country, but in whichever country they were found guilty of that, it is punishable. So what happens? He cannot take the defense, in my country, this is not punishable, but why should I be punished here? Ignorance of law is no excuse for anyone. Okay? So, irrespective of whichever nationality, you are governed by foreign judgments. We notice that many people go abroad, then they decide that they want to put away their wife. They file a case for divorce and then send it to India saying that, okay, I have divorced you. Are these judgments binding on their spouses in India? Yes, it is. Even if they have not been given an opportunity to fight that case, whatever, it is still binding on them unless they file another case in India challenging that order, saying that it is not binding for whatever reason. Okay, but whether it stands or no is a different issue. It will not stand if it has not been done in the eyes of equal justice and equity. Suppose proper summons or process was not sent to this person. This person has not received summons, or this person was not intimated that a case was filed. That is wrong as per law, whichever country law. Every person has a right of audience. You have a right to even voice your grievance, to challenge whatever is filed against you. So if that opportunity has not been given, if you are not permitted to exhaust that remedy of yours, you still have it open for you to challenge that order. But the next thing is whether you can challenge it in India or you have to go back there. You have to go back to whichever country has passed that judgment and challenge it there. Now, a judgment which has been passed in maybe some country outside India, you cannot challenge that order here. You have to make arrangements to make sure that you have suitably engaged somebody to challenge this order in whichever country that order has come from. Okay. Now coming to section 7, government pleader. When we talk of people who plead on behalf of the state, in civil cases, you have a government pleader. He is an officer appointed by the state government. So he is under the payrolls of the government. In other words, he is a public servant under section 21 of IPC. He performs all or any of the functions which are imposed by this civil code, and a government pleader is usually one appointed. He could be either a government pleader in a civil court of law or maybe in a high court. Government pleaders, or sometimes we call them even standing counsels. Government pleaders are those pleaders who appear on behalf of the government. On the criminal side, what are these persons called? What are these pleaders who plead on behalf of the state called? Come on, unmute and answer.
Ma'am, prosecutors?
Yes, correct. Okay. In criminal cases, these are called public prosecutors. Public prosecutors, you have them right from magistrate courts. Then with promotion, they become public prosecutors in sessions court. And then they become SPP, state public prosecutors in the high court. Okay, same way, in the high court, you start off with government pleaders. Then they become senior government pleaders, and then the senior most among them, or the person who is appointed by the chief minister or who is in the service of the government to represent the state, okay, the highest post, he is called the Advocate General. Advocate General, he usually appears on behalf of the state. For example, in the High Court, you may ask, what's cases? Now you have a case against the Pollution Control Board. You have a case against the Excise Department. You have a case maybe against one of the government departments of birth and death registration. Maybe you have a case against one of the government departments of maybe, mention a few government departments. Unmute yourselves.
Registry offices.
Yes, okay, sub-register office. Registry office, okay, there is a case where maybe a sub-register is, maybe he is caught in some case wherein he has to be represented by a government official. So who is this government advocate who is going to plead on his behalf? He is a government pleader, okay? So civil cases, you have government pleaders. The highest in them is the Advocate General, and likewise in criminal cases you have public prosecutors, the highest among them in the High Court of Karnataka, or in whichever High Court is the state public prosecutor or the SPP. The next definition
Excuse
is,
me, ma'am.
yes please.
Ma'am, then who are these people, the post who hold the name of solicitors?
Okay, solicitors are the one who are just below the, who are there along with a team of prosecutors, okay, or a team of pleaders. The senior among them are solicitors. When they come before the Supreme Court, you have Solicitor General of India. Have you heard of that? Okay. So solicitors are, when they come to a higher court, they are also a team. There's not just one, there's a team of these solicitors. And the highest among them is the Solicitor General. He is also like the Advocate General, how you have him in a high court, you have the Solicitor General. And you have these various other pleaders also. You have additional Solicitor Generals, Advocate Generals, or these government pleaders also. You have additional solicitors, additional Advocate Generals, and these are all a team of public prosecutors or these team of pleaders who work in a group, okay? And you have so many additional state public prosecutors. The highest among them is the state public prosecutor, and you have all the rest of them are the additionals. And always remember, they work as per the choice of the ruling party, the government. The Advocate General, who's there now presently, he will be a choice, or he will be selected by the ruling party right now, whichever state, whichever district. Once our ruling party collapses, the next ruling party comes, they wouldn't want the same Advocate General. They will have somebody from their party. So you know how important casteism, politics even controls our judiciary? Well, unfortunately, yes. Okay. So they will have somebody whom they want. The Prime Minister will have his select as per his liking as his solicitor to be the Solicitor General of India. Likewise, our Prime Minister, the Chief Minister of our state, he will have his choice of Advocate General to be there during his term. If his seat is vacant and the next ruling party comes after an election, automatically all these people are changed and the next set of people come according to their selection. Okay, so all this you see is a selection process, but this is all too much for you all to now go into. Okay, y'all are all still in the budding stage. I would like you all to bloom without any prejudice in mind, okay, being prejudiced, okay, this is a ruling party, this is my caste, this is my community, this is my political background. Let's not think of that, okay. When you come there, you will realize it is the survival of the fittest, okay. So coming back to what I was just saying, next would be high courts. High courts refer to the highest court of each state. Each state has a high court. With relation to Andamans and Nicobar Islands, it is the High Court in Calcutta, and rest of the states in India, each state has its own High Court. But in Bangalore, you notice, apart from the High Court of Karnataka, you also have two other courts. What are those courts called?
City Civil Court and
They are called circuit benches. Okay. These are called circuit benches, or these are also high courts of Karnataka, but situated at Gulbarga and situated at Dharwad. Okay, so Dharwad and Gulbarga also have circuit benches to cater to the needs of litigants from the north of Karnataka, because it's not possible for those from North Karnataka to come down to Bangalore to fight their case. So to cater to the needs of these people, it has been divided. Uttara Karnataka, they have these circuit benches which equally function as good as the high courts in Karnataka. The same judges on a rotational basis, on a roster basis. Okay, they also are posted there, and these cases are before these circuit benches. So when we refer, okay, next section 8. When we refer to a judge, we refer to any presiding officer of every civil court. It could be either a senior division, a junior division, it could be one of the district and sessions courts. So when you refer to a judge, it refers to a presiding officer. Usually we call them as PO. Okay, a PO is a presiding officer. Judgment means the statement given by the judge on the grounds of any decree or final order that he passes. Section 9. Section 10, judgment debtor. I mentioned
Section 9.
section 9 is judgment. Judgment, okay, we will be coming to an entire chapter on judgment. I'm just taking you through what are all the terms that you're going to come through in the course of our lectures. Okay, these are all the terms. We have an entire chapter on judgment. How are judgments passed? What are the contents? And everything. Okay, I will deal with it in detail. So when you say judgment, it refers to any statement which is given by the judge on the grounds of any decree or order that he is passing, any final order that he is passing in any civil, in any case. Okay, to be particular, in any case with reference to CPC, any civil suit. Even a criminal final order is called a judgment. But the only difference is in civil cases, you have a judgment and decree, whereas in a criminal case, you just have a judgment. Okay. So, section 9, judgment means, I told you, the statement given by a judge. Section 10 is judgment debtor. How I told you, section 3 is decree holder. That means the person in whose favor a decree has been passed and he is capable of filing a case or a petition for execution. His opposite party, like how you have plaintiff, defendant, petitioner, respondent. The same way in an execution petition, it is decree holder and judgment debtor. So a judgment debtor means a person against whom a decree has been passed or who is capable to contest whatever order has been passed against him, so that he too will be given an opportunity of being heard, or to see that he at least has an opportunity to voice whatever is his grievance in that case, whether he can compromise that case or whatever. Section 11 refers to legal representation. What do you mean by legal representation? Legal representation means where a person who in law represents the estate of a deceased person. A deceased person is a person who is no more, who has expired. So legal representative or a legal representative, okay, when you have a legal representative, he legally represents you in a case. In other words, he is called an LR, legal representative. When somebody during the pendency of a case expires, what do? You find a civil case against somebody, maybe stating that you had entered into an agreement with so-and-so, and this so-and-so had taken money from you and not done whatever were the terms and conditions of the contract entered into between both of y'all. So this case is called a case of specific performance. Specific performance is where you get a direction from court to specifically enforce whatever is your case or whatever is your contracts or the terms of conditions in your agreement. For example, maybe as an employee, you have certain terms and conditions. Or maybe you have entered into a sale agreement and either you have not kept up to the terms and conditions, or maybe the vendor who is selling you the property, he refuses to sell it to you because maybe he is getting a person who is offering him something higher than what you have agreed for. So definitely he would want to sell it to the other person, isn't it? So he refuses to sell it to you, but he's already taken a token advance from you, made an agreement, and now you want to enforce it and tell the court, he had agreed for 50 lakhs, he has taken 5 lakhs and promised that at the time of registration he will collect the balance 45. But now he's been offered 60 lakhs, so he's refusing to sell it to me. So what happens? You file a civil suit called specific performance. Okay, usually when you file a case for specific performance, you have a high court fee to be paid based on what is the sale consideration agreed upon. So what will be your stamp duty will be on the 50 lakhs that was entered in the document. Okay, people usually refrain from filing specific performance only because the court fee is very high. So when you file this court fee, after paying this, you file a suit. You get an order or a direction from the court directing the defendant to go before the concerned sub-register and register the document as agreed upon in the contract in your favor. Now suppose during the pendency of this case, the plaintiff dies or the defendant dies. Now we'll talk about the plaintiff dying first. The plaintiff, the person who was supposed to purchase the property, he dies. Does the case abate? What do you mean by abate? A-B-A-T-E. Abate is when during the pendency of any particular case, the party to the suit expires. So the case does not abate, the case does not dissolve or get dismissed because either of the parties, plaintiff or defendant, dies. It is the duty of the concerned counsel, advocate, to bring to the notice of the court that so and so the plaintiff has expired, or maybe the defendant has expired. So the legal representatives, the LRs of the plaintiff or the LRs of the defendant have to be brought on record. They have to come and contest the case and pursue it from which stage it has stopped. So if there is a direction that the defendant has to register the property in favor of the plaintiff and the plaintiff dies, he will register the property in the name of the legal representative of the plaintiff, his wife, or maybe his eldest son or whoever, okay, according to what the plaintiff's family decides. Suppose the defendant himself dies. The court will direct the legal representative, either the wife or the children, or maybe everyone, the wife and the children, jointly to represent the deceased and to come and execute this order. So in any case where either of the parties expire during the pendency of a case, his legal representatives or his legal heirs, these are the people who can come and contest the case, either sue or be sued in a representative capacity on whatever has devolved on them. Devolved means wherein they have succeeded to that. Now here in this property specific performance, once the father or whoever was the owner of the property dies, the property automatically devolves on their legal heirs. Devolves means it goes automatically, okay? They inherit the property which comes to them. So when they inherit the property, they automatically become legal heirs. Okay, they become owners of the property by virtue of their father or parent, whoever has expired, and they have a right to register it or maybe sell it or whatever, even if it's in a suit where it's a money suit, payment of money. It could be an injunction suit. It could be maybe a check bounce case. Check bounce cases also are the same procedure. Suppose during the pendency of the case, the accused passes away or the complainant passes away, your duty as an advocate is to bring his LRs on record, legal representatives, and they have to settle the case. They cannot say, no, it was not me, it was my father, it was my husband, it was my wife, it was my son, I am not responsible. Whoever is the legal heir, maybe the son dies, who is next? If he's a Hindu, as per Hindu law, you know who are his first class legal heirs, isn't it? You have a chart which says who are the legal heirs of the first class. Father, mother, then you have, okay, if it's a wife, then it's a husband, then you have the children. Children are not there, then you have your grandparents, you have your nieces, your nephews, as per whichever is the law under which you are governed. Okay, your personal laws as a Hindu or as a Mohammedan, your Succession Act, Indian Succession Act, which applies to Indian Christians, Mohammedans, Parsis, Sikhs, Buddhists, okay, they come under the Indian Succession Act. So as per your personal laws of succession, the legal heirs are legal representatives. Section 12. Mesne profits refer to profits, or it means the profits in a certain property which a person has wrongful possession of. And such property actually is received maybe by somebody else who in the ordinary course of life actually should not get this. For example, you have rented out your property to somebody. It could be maybe a big farmland, and this farmland you have rented it out to him to maybe cultivate certain things. When he is cultivating certain things, he is also maybe simultaneously doing something illegal which is not in your contract, and he is earning some property, some benefits out of it, or maybe he is getting some other benefits from it which is not in your contract, which is unknown to you. And later on you realize, okay, this is my tenant. Okay, I had given him this land, leased out this land to him, and now this is what he is doing. So is he just obligated as per the terms of your contract to just pay you what he is due as per your contract? Or is he also due to you to pay whatever he is earning extra benefits from that? Another example would be, you have let out, as I told you, your farmland to somebody. He cultivates, maybe he is keeping some maybe ragi or something, and he has taken it from you so that he can cultivate once a year. He gives you so much. He has ragi, he has vegetables and everything. Without you knowing, he starts another business also. In your absence, he puts up a small shed and maybe he starts doing another business there. Are you entitled for profits from that business also? So mesne profits of property means those profits which the person in wrongful possession of such property actually receives such profit which is not supposed to be his as per law. Because legally he is not the owner of that. He is only put in charge of that so that he receives some other benefit. But in turn, without your knowledge, he gets something out of it, which maybe it could be profits which he has earned over a period of time, which comes to your knowledge maybe subsequently, because of which he has to pay you not only those profits, he has to pay it together with interest on such profits. And these profits would be things which he is not supposed to get, which in other words you say he is in wrongful possession. Now maybe some tenant of yours, we will come to a city. Okay, I told you just now about a farmland. Let's come to a city situation. You have rented out your entire building to maybe run a PG accommodation. Okay, PG accommodation is going on. In the meanwhile, maybe one entire floor, this person has leased it out to somebody and this person is running a lease. And this lease amount, he has taken 12 lakhs for the entire one floor, and this 12 lakhs he has invested your money in something else, but you are not aware. He is just giving you a monthly rental of maybe 4,000 rupees for 2 rooms. So here also he has 4 rooms, so he is giving you 16,000 per month, but he is not disclosing the fact that he has already leased it out for a higher sum. And that amount he has invested it somewhere else. Tomorrow you come to know and you realize that his business or investment is with your money because it is your property. This is a wrongful possession of the property that he is holding. You had not leased it to him. You had just rented it out to him, telling him that he has the right to rent out the property as a paying guest accommodation. So what happens? Are you entitled for those profits? Yes, you are. Okay. These profits are called mesne profits. You also claim mesne profits from your opposite client. Suppose you are the owner of a property. Your client is supposed to, on or before a certain date, leave the property. You have sent him a notice to quit and vacate that premises, in spite of which he does not vacate. Every other day that he stays in the said premises, he is supposed to pay you a mesne profit, which is called wrongful possession of property. So usually you're the owner of a property. You have leased out your property, or maybe you have rented out your property to somebody for a period of 11 months. Periodically, every 11 months, you keep renewing your agreement for the next 3 years. After 3 years, at the last renewal, you tell him, my friend, I want you to vacate the property on or before the 31st of July 2020. So he promises to vacate on or before 2020, July 31st. But then he continues. Every day of August 2020, from 1st till today, 13, he has to pay you a mesne profit. Now, how do you calculate it? Well, you could tell him, you have to pay me 1,000 rupees per day. You could tell him 5,000 per day, whatever. But end of the day, you hold a certain deposit of his, which you can deduct that money from. Or if you approach a court of law for ejectment, ejectment is where you file a suit against a person for eviction. Okay, that's called an ejectment suit. Okay, earlier if it was under HRC, the House Rent Control Act, you called it a eviction suit. But now because properties, the rental is more than 3,000 per month and the area is more than 14 squares, we call it an ejectment suit. Okay, you file a civil suit where the owner of the property, the owner asks the tenant to vacate. So that time, in your prayer, apart from asking for ejectment or to vacate your premises, you will also be asking him to pay you a mesne profits for wrongful possession of your property every other day after the day on which his agreement expired. Okay. Next, movable property. Movable property includes growing property, anything which is movable, which can be shifted, which is not fixed to the ground, is movable property. Immobile is anything which is fixed to the ground. Okay. Order means the formal expression of any decision of a civil court. That was section 14. Section 15 is a pleader, is any person who is entitled to appear and plead for another in a court, including an advocate, a vakil, or an attorney of a high court. Prescribed means when you say it is prescribed by law, it means it is prescribed by rules and regulations. So prescribed means by rules. Section 17, public officer means a person falling under any of the following descriptions, which could mean a public officer, also means anyone under section 21 of IPC. It also means every judge, every member of the All India services, okay, IAS, IPS, IFS, any of those cadres, and every commissioned or gazetted officer in the military, navy, air force, or whatever, every officer of a court of justice, or any person who holds any office by virtue of which he is empowered or placed or kept in a particular place wherein he is authorized by law to perform such functions or particular duties. It could be every officer of a government whose duty it is to take care, give information regarding offences, bring offenders to book, okay, give justice or protect public health, health officers, safety, conveyances, conveniences, whatever. So these officers in the service or in the pay of the government, okay, same like how you have section 21 under criminal procedure, you have this section of 17, public officer, the various people who fall under the categories of being a public officer or a government official, a government servant. So with this, you have again rules, which is section 18. Rules refers to any rules or forms contained in the first schedule or which is made in the CPC. Section 19, share in a corporation shall be deemed to include stocks, debentures, and stock debentures, bonds, whatever these are referred to shares when you talk of a corporation or when it deals with company law. And when you refer to anything which is signed, section 20, signed would be any judgment or a decree. When you say it is signed, it also includes a seal from the authority or the competent authority, a court of law, which is signed and sealed. So with this, we finished the section on definitions from 1 to 20. You have various definitions. Some are basic normal words which we use in common English, okay, like rules, regulations, shares, pleaders, all that. And some have a little vast, and the ambit of it is much more with the legal perspective, okay. Legally, we deal with these words. So when we refer to all these during the course of our class, I hope you all are well versed with all these terms. Anytime you all don't understand anything, raise your hands. I will repeat it and I will make sure that you understand what exactly I am trying to convey. So when we talk about courts, for the purpose of this code, every district has a district court. Okay, the highest court of every district or every state, as we call it, is the High Court. District have various city civil courts, and headquarters of every district have civil and junior districts. You have courts of small causes, and you have small causes where municipal judges are. Okay, you have HRC, house rent control. You have some of the cases are basically, classification of cases are basically on jurisdiction, which is territorial jurisdiction based on where it is located, and pecuniary jurisdiction depending on the amount involved in that particular case, okay. So you have pecuniary jurisdiction and you have a territorial jurisdiction. Small causes cases deal with cases which have pecuniary jurisdiction. That means where the amount is not more than 5 lakhs. Now you have to get recovery of money from somebody, okay, or maybe you are asking somebody to vacate your house. You have a HRC case, then you have MVC case, motor vehicle claims case. All these are filed before the small causes courts, okay. In a Bangalore district, or in a district headquarters, they are called small causes courts. In rural areas, these are called senior division, junior division, and if it is a criminal, it is JMFCs, judicial magistrates of the first class. So, when you apply to each one of these courts, okay, you have to first consider what are the various jurisdictions. For example, you have revenue courts. Now, what are revenue courts? Revenue courts are governed by the provisions of procedures wherein certain acts or enactments are enforceable in these particular courts. Now, revenue courts wherein money has to be received by somebody. So then you have these revenue courts wherein you have by the official gazette, okay, so notification has been made declaring certain courts as revenue courts. That is for recovery of money. Now you have, for example, now you have to pay taxes to the government. It could be for your vehicle. It could be for your property. Now to pay a property tax, BBMP is not going to file a case before the city civil court or the district court of any state. They have their revenue courts. Okay, their presiding officer will be their executive engineer who will be the case worker for each case and the commissioner of BBMP. The commissioner will be the presiding officer of these revenue courts. They will send you a notice. You are supposed to come before his court and you are supposed to pay whatever is the dues to him. Maybe you have bifurcated your property and given some false documents with regard to your extent of property or whatever, conceal certain things, a notice is given to you. BBMP have their own courts, as I mentioned, headed by their commissioner, wherein you will appear. You have company law boards, where when you have a company law matter, you will appear before that board. You have your motor vehicle tribunals, wherein you come when you have an accident for claims before a court. But suppose certain taxes have not been paid on your vehicle. Your FC is not paid. Okay, fitness certificate has not been taken and you have not paid for whatever you have to pay penal charges for having ridden your vehicle without having a proper fitness certificate. Or maybe you are over and above due date, you have been doing something. So that time what happens? You go to the tribunal or you go to the RT office. There you have the commissioner before whom he has a revenue court and there you can pay whatever are the fines or whatever. Okay. So whatever are civil in nature, collection of revenue, we see that this application of the court is possible in these type of revenue courts also. They follow the civil procedure.
Ma'am?
Yes, please.
So the revenue court deals with only the matter which are prevalent or which are like related to pecuniary interest, nothing apart from that.
Pecuniary interest, you come before a small causes, but these revenue courts are only where you are due a certain sum. Okay, it's not a continuing process where you pay something for the future. It is when you are in arrears of something, you have failed or neglected to pay whatever you are due. It is only then that you go before these revenue courts because notice is sent to you from that authority. You do not go and file a case. It is the revenue officer suo moto who takes action against you and sends you a notice to come and pay the fine.
For
Okay.
simpler meaning, we can say that like we like a normal people can't approach directly to the revenue court, but the government authority can send a notice by like which will make us to approach such court.
Now, Manasi, give me an example of where you want to appear before a revenue court.
Like I was not having an idea, ma'am. That's why I was confused.
Fine. Okay, I thought you had something in mind in particular. Okay. See, you or me as an individual, he wouldn't want to go before a revenue court. Why? Because if you have to get some money from somebody, you have to go based on a pecuniary jurisdiction before a civil court. It is only revenue authorities, government departments which can have revenue courts. When you are a defaulter to the government, revenue courts function under the code. Okay? So it is a government authority who sends you a notice from a revenue court. You don't file as an individual. If you are aggrieved by something, then you have various recourse to law before various other courts. Revenue courts are where now BBMP, why will you file a case before the BBMP asking for some order? If you are agreed by BBMP, go before a city court. Okay, make BBMP or the local body a party, and then you can voice your grievance and ask for whatever you want. Or go on an appeal and file an application before the commissioner if you want certain things. Your neighbor is restricting your, maybe he's putting up some things, he's not leaving a setback. First thing is you give a letter to the BBMP commissioner, and thereafter you go before a court of law, but not before a revenue court. Revenue, as the name itself suggests, is where a certain amount of money is involved to a particular government department. Okay? And this amount is due as something which is civil in nature. It's not a penal amount which is due. Okay? Don't get confused with penal amount which comes as a fine and a revenue court. This is only civil courts where it is a revenue court which has to get revenue from whoever.
Can it be an example of income tax?
Now, for example, you have your income tax.
Yes,
You don't pay your income tax. What are they going to do? Apart from penally taking action against you as per penal laws for evading tax or whatever, the income tax commissioner, you can file an appeal before him. That is a revenue court. Understand?
yes,
So he will send you a notice. When the income tax officer sends you a notice, that comes from a revenue court, because he is telling you that you have been a defaulter, you have not paid your tax, you have evaded tax, you were supposed to pay so much of tax, but you have paid only so much. This is the difference amount. Okay, so that is when these revenue courts, government departments or entities, they function under the code of civil procedure. I'm just telling you the procedural aspect right now. Okay, we'll go into depth when we come to those chapters.
okay.
Okay, so next, section 6 talks about pecuniary jurisdiction. Pecuniary jurisdiction refers to various courts where we have an opportunity to appear before these courts, and this opportunity that we have as litigants, as advocates to appear, is based on the jurisdiction of suits or the amount of, or that is due in certain cases. Now, as I told you, for small causes courts, okay, we have the small, least of them is small causes, or as we call them as senior division and junior division. Junior division is usually civil courts wherein you can file maybe recovery suits, or where the property is valued at a certain amount or whatever. So when you say pecuniary jurisdiction of courts is based on money. When you say pecuniary refers to the money involved. Okay, so in other words, pecuniary means money, currency, or any amount. So suits which have to be tried by small causes courts, any execution of decrees, or maybe you have to file a civil case for recovery of money, or maybe some property wherein you have to get possession of a certain property, or you want to evict somebody from a certain property, you want to file an injunction suit, or you want to file a specific performance based on certain contracts. At that time, it will be based on various pecuniary aspects. Okay, the least minimum is 5 lakhs, below 5 lakhs, and then the pecuniary jurisdiction lowest courts are small causes, civil courts of senior and junior division. Then after the senior and junior division, you have your district courts. Any suit wherein the pecuniary jurisdiction is more than 50 lakhs, they are tried by the Debt Recovery Tribunal. Debt Recovery Tribunal, the procedure is entirely different. It's not, the sittings are not like our usual district courts. There also the person who is a presiding officer is usually of the cadre of a district judge. And you have these debt recovery tribunals which deal with money suits. Basically, most of the cases which come there are maybe shipping matters. It could be bank loans where people take huge amounts, keeping assets as a pledge, mortgage. You buy a big apartment, you buy a building, or maybe you ask certain banks, you take loans from 3-4 banks, all amounting to certain amounts. If it is more than this amount, then the pecuniary jurisdiction would allow you to only file before the Debt Recovery Tribunal, DRT. So earlier we had presidency small causes courts. Okay, this was only in the states of Calcutta, Madras and Mumbai or Bombay, wherein small causes courts were established in various towns. These were the major towns during the British rule. And as you know, from 1908, this act has been there. So because of which it was in lines with our British law. So presidency small causes or presidency towns, where these major towns were business, all these activities were taken care. Okay, and that usually used to be where there was a port, because it was easier for them to transact, for them to establish their business activities, whatever. So Calcutta, Madras and Bombay were the main ports wherein these presidency towns actually flourished and where they had all these courts. So all those courts which were established here were presidency courts. But no doubt now we don't have this anymore, because it has been no more in after the British rule ended here. Okay, we no more have presidency towns or whatever, but yet it has been a part of the act, no doubt. Now it has been substituted with various sections, because now we no more refer to it. But we have the high courts of adjudicator, or these high courts. Okay, earlier they were called high courts of adjudicator, which were also at Madras, Bombay and Calcutta, but now they are just called high courts of whichever district, or I mean whichever state. And as I told you, since Andaman and Nicobar Islands also are a part of India, the High Court of Adjudicator, or whichever the High Court which is situated in Andamans and Nicobar, is part and parcel or forms a part of the Calcutta High Court. Like how they have a circuit bench in Gulbarga and Dharwad, the same way they have a circuit bench which functions from Calcutta at Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So we see that in general, these are just a few of the principles and definitions that we come across here. And basically when you see CPC, it is a very, very vast subject, because it covers every aspect of civil procedure and every aspect of anything to deal with courts, functioning of judgments, how things have to be drafted in court, how it has to be submitted. Every procedure to its minutest detail is envisaged in the Civil Procedure Code. So courts, all courts, civil courts are to try all civil suits unless they are barred by law. And basically a suit which has a right to property or whatever, it could be property matters, it could be either recovery matters of money, whatever. Every court has a right to try every suit unless it is barred by certain things. What are bars to filing of suits? Bar means when there is anything which restricts or hinders filing of any particular case. Bar to certain cases are when a plaintiff is precluded, or he is restrained from certain rules, from instituting a case maybe when he already has a particular cause of action. Or maybe, as I told you, for civil or criminal cases, there always has to be a cause of action. That is what sets the law into motion. So when there is no cause of action, a person cannot be entitled to institute or file a suit unless you are aggrieved by certain thing. You have to have a cause of action. Unless somebody has encroached into your property, you will not be able to fight the case. Unless somebody owes you a money which you are due and he fails and neglects to pay it, you will not be able to file a suit for recovery or even maybe a suit to claim anything as compensation or whatever. So for everything, there has to be a cause of action, and the cause of action should be immediate. The cause of action from when the incident or it starts, the cause of action to the time when you start the suit, there is a certain time. This time is given under the Limitations Act. There's something called the Limitations Act. Suppose what happens if there's a cause of action and you fail to take action and file a case? Can you still file it? Yes, you can. You still have an opportunity to file it under Section 5 of the Limitation Act. You file an application under that Section 5 of the Limitation Act, giving good valid reasons as to why you were unable to do that particular thing at a particular point of time. It could be owing to the fact that you were unable to procure certain things to file it, owing to ill health or maybe something else of grave nature, you were unable to file it in the appropriate point of time. So for everything, there still is a hope. We are not like doctors, are we? Doctors, the be all end all in everyone's life is ultimately his life itself. If a doctor is negligent, it's over. But for an advocate, fortunately, whatever still happens, there is a provision in law where you can recall it. You still have time to restore it. Even a dead case, you can still revive him. But not like a human being which can be revived. But a dead case can still get back some life by filing appropriate actions, making out a cause of action and putting it back on board. For everything, you still have a recourse to law. That is one advantage of this civil procedure as well as criminal procedure. So, when you have a particular case that you file, you always have an opportunity to file a suit only based on its cause of action. So you cannot file a case when already there is a case pending in a particular court. Now suppose you have already filed a case against your neighbor for a particular action. Thereafter, under similar cause of action or similar circumstances, you cannot file another case. If you do that, you can always stay that suit under Section 10 because no court can proceed with the trial of any suit which is similar in matter or which has issues which are directly or substantially the same issues involved in the next subsequent case. That means previously you have already instituted a suit between the same parties or maybe under the same cause of action wherein the same people are involved. Again, you cannot file a similar case. Now suppose you have already got a judgment and decree which was not in your favor. You cannot wait for another 6 months, 1 year and again file another case on the same cause of action against the same person but alleging different facts because already the same cause of action has been decided. Under these circumstances, you file a stay or you ask the court to drop those proceedings or stay of those cases or proceedings under Section 10 of CPC, stating that the same cause of action has been alleged again, because of which you cannot again file a case against the same parties or same cause of action. Suppose there is already a cause of action, okay? You cannot, no court should try the suit, or if the issues involved in any particular matter, it should not be directly or indirectly the same thing as it was in a former case or in a particular matter which was already decided. So that time you say it is barred by res judicata. Res judicata is when you stay a particular matter, a judicial process, because it is the same thing which is between the same parties who were either claimants or litigants or who had the same title or maybe who were in a particular case earlier, wherein again you are trying to do a same case on the same cause of action or whatever. In criminal law, the same thing is called double jeopardy, where already somebody has been tried or punished or acquitted for a particular case, you again cannot file something against that particular person. Okay, so and then you say it is a case of double jeopardy. So the same way, section 10 and 11 is stay of certain cases, okay, bar in certain cases when already there exists a pending matter or already a case has been decided on similar lines in a similar case, cause of action, facts, and between the similar parties, same parties, and again you are trying to pull up your opponent for whatever reason. So that time it is barred by res judicata. Okay, usually this section 10 and 11 is a repeated question in most of the CPC examinations and questionnaires, wherein a question comes on res judicata. Okay, so for the purpose of this section, section 11, which is very important, usually we see the relief claimed in any plaint. It should not be the same relief which has already been granted in a similar cause of action or a case. So where a person, he litigates and he bona fide believes, okay, or he genuinely believes that in a particular case, this was not given to him. So again, he tries to get another order on the same cause of action. It is for the judge to decide whether it comprises a new matter or it pertains to the same old facts and circumstances due to which it is res judicata. Once any case is over and a final judgment and decree is given, it is final. Where a plaintiff has a judgment or decree in his favor, he is barred to any further suit on the same particular cause of action between the same parties or between parties under whom they or any of them claim any litigation, except where maybe the court has pronounced a particular order and that order does not deal with any particular person, then the aggrieved person still has a right to say, even I have to get a share in that. Okay, sometimes, for example, let's take a case of company law. Okay, maybe some particular case wherein a company has been wound up. There are a group of litigants who have asked for winding up of a company. Winding up of a company, when does it happen? A winding up of a company happens when maybe, yes, you want to say something, Manasi?
No, ma'am, I will. Nothing, ma'am.
Okay, winding up of a company happens when a company goes into liquidation. A company goes into maybe some type of a condition wherein it is not able to pay its debtors or pay whoever it has to rightfully owe money. So that time, one of the persons can ask for winding up of this company. They file an application before the concerned company law board. You file an application also before the High Court of the concerned state. Excuse me. Praying that the court would wind up that company. That time an official liquidator is appointed. When the winding up proceedings take place, what happens is you have two lists of people. One are the people whom you owe money to, you are liable to pay, and the other is what are the assets of the company. So one side it's the liabilities and the other side it's the assets of the company. So when it comes to liabilities, each one of its stockholders, shareholders, people who have invested in it, people who are concerned, employees of the company, it could be the owners of the building where the company was doing their regular business. Okay, so these are all the people whom the company is liable to. So they file for winding up. So the official liquidator, what he does is, he makes a list of all these people, okay? It is announced in the newspaper. Sometimes you may see newspaper cuttings. In the company law board of so-and-so adjudicator at such and such a high court, okay? Company law petition number between so-and-so company versus so-and-so. Okay, please take note, within so many days, if you don't come up, anyone who has anything to deal with the company, either directly or indirectly, may write to such and such a thing with whatever is your claim, with substantial documents, name, address, email, and they give you a contact number, email, WhatsApp, whatever, and ask you to mail whatever are your details. Now let us take, for example, you invest money in a particular company. Okay, Dreams. Many of you all must have heard about Dreams. Okay, they were a company floating a lot of sites, apartments and all that. Okay, Dreams was a company, Dreams Private Limited, Info in India or something. Okay, they had a company where they were having a lot of apartments for sale. Many people had invested. They had made agreements for sale, paid a partial one-time amount towards partial sale consideration. They had an agreement and ultimately they realized the entire company collapsed and they owe thousands of crores to their investors. So what happens? Each one of these people, they make a group. Okay, they all get together and seeing this advertisement, or anyway, once you get into anything like this, okay, you give a police complaint, they form a group. There is a police officer who's in charge, who has documents to collect. You have to give them all your set of documents, okay, right from your Aadhaar card to your agreements, whatever transactions, your bank passbook statement, what are the payments made, okay. So all that you have to substantiate, whatever you claim, you have to substantiate with necessary documents. So once you file all this, what happens? The official receiver, he is entitled to sell all their assets. Now, do they have machinery, computers, their buildings? Okay, then you have their various, okay, so many people owe them money. Maybe they have lands and property which have to be sold. So when all this is done, what happens is they get into a type of a transaction wherein they can still go ahead and sell all this or auction all this so that they recover money. Now suppose they have immobile property, it could be their building, it could be leased land wherein they have paid someone a leased amount, so they can get back all the amount possible, which is the assets of the company, and selling every bit of furniture, fittings, fixtures, whatever, and this amount will be distributed as per a certain percentage based on whatever each person has invested. Okay, so when you have something like this, what happens is the plaintiff, he has to initiate a suit wherein he has to claim certain amounts. Now, once he claims certain amount and he gets a partial payment, it is a full and final settlement. Again, he cannot file a case and say, well, I actually had to get 25 lakhs, but I was just getting 10. That 10 is the maximum he can get after the official liquidator and the receiver, they appear before the High Court. This is the money received. This is the amount people have to get. They work out a percentage and full and final, this is the amount that is given to each person. So again, if he tries to file a case against maybe recovery against that company saying, I still have a deficit of another 15 lakhs. This cannot be given to him by any court of law because there is a bar to further suit once a final decree has been passed. So on the same cause of action, you cannot file a case once again. So as for now, I have just taken you through what are suits and what exactly are these various recourses to law. Now I would like to open it to a session of question answer. Yes, you all can unmute yourselves. Any questions on the basic definitions and what I have mentioned today, please?
No, ma'am, I don't have any. Ma'am, I just wanted to ask one thing. When you were explaining solicitors,
Yeah.
and like you were explaining that these are the kind of, you know, a group of people group of lawyer or we can say group of people who will practice law. So what is the basic difference between solicitors and associates, ma'am? Because associates also have a group of people working together and representing for any case.
Okay, now we are not talking about advocates, lawyers, and solicitors who work independently as solicitors in their regular offices. Now, I too am an advocate by profession. I'm a lawyer. I'm a solicitor. I solicit clients. I speak to them. I do conveyancing. I do litigation and everything. But when we refer to solicitors, government pleaders, and pleaders, here we are referring only to those appointed by the government. They are basically public officers or public servants who are in the pay and in the salary of the government. Okay, this is not referring to other individual solicitors and things. But in India, usually we don't call them as solicitors as such. We just call them as advocates and lawyers. In at least the Western countries, they are referred to as solicitors, but they are also independent solicitors. They are not appointed by the government. Now here I may be a criminal advocate, but I am not a public prosecutor. I am a public prosecutor only if I am appointed by the government. And how am I appointed by the government? To become a district judge, munsif, or also a public prosecutor, I have to attend a certain examination, pass that, go through the viva, and then comes my appointment. Okay, so this is the difference between appointment as a solicitor and the other group of regular advocates who call themselves as solicitors. But they are not solicitor generals and things. They are just independent advocates who say that we are solicitors. Solicitors is any person advocating on behalf of a person. Okay. Yes, what about the rest of y'all? Are y'all there or have y'all dropped off to sleep?
No, ma'am.
Okay, Lavin. Any questions?
No, ma'am. Actually, the entire session was pretty much clear. But
Okay.
I also have a concern regarding this solicitor thing. Like, I interned in a firm, so they wrote the name of the firm as Associates and Solicitors.
Okay.
And there was another firm in which the head of that, the person, the main advocate who was the main owner of that firm, so he was also the solicitor at state level. So I
Okay.
got confused pretty much, like what is the difference in their role and duties and
Okay.
their status
Now,
in the
in
court?
an independent solicitor is now, as I say, advocate. I do my law graduation. I get enrolled in a bar, and then I practice advocacy. Okay, and I solicit clients also. Solicit. What does it mean to solicit? The basic English meaning is when you entertain somebody. A solicitor here entertains clients and he works for them, isn't it? So here a solicitor works, the solicitor that we are talking, the additional solicitor, the Solicitor General of India, whatever, they are on the pay of the government. Okay? They are on the pay of the government and they work for a remuneration which is because of which they are termed as public servants or government servants. Okay, so long as they hold that job. And as I told you, that does not happen permanently. They are there only for a transitory period so long as the government is there. They are basically appointed on the whims, fancies, and of the choice of the government. Suppose the government decides to remove him and put somebody else, immediately the government does that also. So then we notice that somebody else in his stead is appointed. Now, likewise, the Advocate General also of our Karnataka High Court, so long as the present BJP ruling party is there, he remains the Advocate General. Maybe tomorrow Congress or JDS comes into power, or maybe an independent political party. They, at their own whim and fancy, would prefer somebody from their party and their recommendation to be there. And that is permitted. Okay. It's their person who will be recommended there and posted there. One among the senior most or whatever. Okay. But it's not that any person is going to be put there. It's definitely a person who has all the credentials required to be a good solicitor, a good advocate who will represent the state at large and also the country if necessary. If he has to go to Supreme Court and also argue for a matter, he will represent the entire nation. Okay, so it is people based on their capacity, their experience who will be heading this post. Okay, but basically it is on the appointment and on the they will be on the payrolls of the government. Yes, Ruchi, Chaitra, Kanchan, Aishwarya, any doubts, any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Well, as we finish each topic, what I would like to do is if there's anything important and any details you all want or any material you all want in any particular topic, I suppose topic wise, I will make sure that I give you all a little notes, and what I will do is I will post it on the group or send you a link or send it by email so that each of you all will have an attachment of whatever is there so that you all can make use of it and keep it for your examination point of view. Okay. Yes, Chaitra, you want to say something? Okay, with this, we end our class for today. Thank you so much for being a part of this class.
Thank you, ma'am.
Lecture. It was nice seeing you all. And with my next class, I will start off on foreign judgments, which are not conclusive. Where exactly are various foreign judgments where they are not binding on us. And with that, I would like to start off all our topics. Okay. Good night to each one of you all. Stay
Good night,
safe.
ma'am.
Take care. Bye-bye.